This is Again for the First Time with your host, Darren Redmond.
Hello, everybody. This is Darren Redmond, and truer words were never spoken when I say judge and friend Mary Beth O'Connor is here again for the first time. See how I built that in there? Because I'm a paid professional. How are you today, my friend?
I'm doing well, and I'm happy to be here and talk with you again.
Well, thank you so much. For those of you who don't know, Mary Beth O'Connor wrote what I think to be one of the greatest books that I've ever read, period. That has to do with self-help, has to do with empowerment, has to do with overcome. You can't pigeonhole this book. It's not just about overcoming. It's not just motivation. It's not just, hey, there are different choices out there and you don't fit into a box. It's not just about harm reduction. It's not about treatment. It's not about overcoming trauma. It's all of that and more. And I want to start by asking you this question. When you wrote the book, did you have any idea that you'd get this sort of response and this sort of legs to a book that I think is just helping more and more people as more and more people know about it?
I mean, when you start writing a book, you don't really have any idea what's going to happen with it. And so in a way, it almost has to be for separate reasons than outcome driven, because there's no way to sort of predict. And so when I thought about the book, and it was when I was first appointed a judge, which was sort of a natural time of reflection. How did I go from shooting meth, starting at 17 until 32? I mean, actually, as we speak today, I'm going to have 30 years of sobriety tomorrow.
Congratulations.
Thank you. And so when I was appointed a federal judge, when I had 20 years, it was just that time to look back and think, well, actually, how did I do this? But also, can my story be of use? Like, is there some use I can use for this story? And for me, part of it was actually starting to read more memoir, because I hadn't read much, because I didn't want to write a book that, was out there 10 times. Is there something I could have to say that's different? Is there a way to make my story of use? And so when I looked at the genre, what I saw was that most memoirs about substance use and recovery, they jump in with the sort of the chaos and crazy stories of the addiction, but they don't show where it came from. And I really wanted to show why it made sense to me to use, drugs starting at 12, meth by 17, why it, my pain-driven use of it went on for so long. And that meant showing the trauma and, the disrupted relationship with my mother and all of that. But then also, at the end, most of the memoirs were like, I went to a couple meetings and that was great. And I thought, well, that's not how recovery works. Right. So I decided I wanted to show the first couple of years as sort of like how I approached it. Also, because I'm not really a 12-step person. So what did I do to develop the individual plan, the secular plan that I did, which has techniques that 12-steppers can use too. But I didn't really see a memoir out there showing a different approach, a more individualized approach. And so those are all the things I thought about as far as it being useful. But you don't know first of all, if you're going to be able to get a publishing deal, or when you do, what's going to happen with it. And now I really view it as really tied with my advocacy, because it does help me get speaking engagements that I might not otherwise get, which is nice. And it helps people. I meet people who have read the book and they're sort of more connected to me, more interested in me, because they've shared my experience through that reading. And so I view it as really sort of, there's an overlap and an interplay between the book and my advocacy work and my speaking in general.
I'm going to put a momentary thumbtack on one thing that you said and immediately pull it out, because my question is this, and I'll follow it up with a comment, has there been a surprise, because we've had some distance now between when the book came out to working and speaking, and that, wow, this is resonating in this strata that I did not expect, and I'm pulling it out now. Like, for example, for everything that you go through, and you speak volumes without preaching, if I may use that word, about, 12 steps is great, but for many people out there who don't have a higher power, you speak to them, because there have been so many people there And I visualize in my own mind that person reading your words and going, thank you, thank you. And you're not saying that this stinks. You're not saying this, you're saying for these people, could you speak to that? Because I think it's brilliant.
Yeah, I mean, I'll say this first. A lot of people that choose not to do 12 steps, it's not even about the higher power. There are other aspects that aren't a good
Sure.
fit, right? And so there's some of the other options are more self-empowerment focused, less, turn my will and my life over powerless. Some people don't like the sponsor relationships in 12 steps. That can have pros and cons. Some women aren't comfortable because it can be really male dominated. I mean, there's a lot of reasons people might make a different choice. But you're right. For me to be able to stand up and say that I did it another way, that I built not just a second, but really a hybrid plan. I mean, I pulled ideas from more than one place, but also I have now 30 years of continuous sobriety. I have a happy and productive life. I'm a retired federal judge. That does, and this was one of my goals, to sort of reassure people who are looking to do it another way, that they don't try to have to force themselves into a program that's not the right fit, that it's okay and just as effective to choose a different approach. And I'm just the real world example of that, it's a credibility factor, but it's also just to help people feel less pressure to do it a way that might not be right for them.
Well, that's, and I've spoken to some people, so I've attended one in particular that you did in Central California, people that, boy, that really, your whole thing resonated, but really spoke to them for that reason. So what do you say to the person who, because there's all these camps now, and I hate using that word, but it's true. The harm reduction only, the non-harm reduction. And I really hate that, because I'm using the word hate on purpose, because the minute you say you want to reduce harm, they label you with whatever that looks like in their own mind. And that somehow means that you want people to die of overdosing on the street. And then there's the people that, lock them up. And why are we shooting at each other? Literally verbal bullets, and stopping the process of just helping people. Why do we do that, you think?
I mean, I heard two different threads, and so I don't want to lose track of the second one. So
Yeah,
there's the criminality versus the health policy perspective thread. I'll put that aside for the second. But then there's the first thread is the abstinence only versus harm reduction pathways. And to me, you're right. There is an unfortunate tendency for some parts of both camps to get too extreme, when in reality, to me, I support both, right? I mean, I view harm reduction and in the many facets of it as it is an evidence-based approach to save lives, but it's also, most harm reduction methods also lead many people to treatment. And so, for example, syringe services programs where people can go in and they can get clean needles. People with a substance use disorder who use syringe services programs are 3 to 5 times as likely to go into treatment. And so it's a positive. I don't think most harm reductionists are saying we don't want more treatment. They're saying we don't have enough treatment right now, which we don't. Sometimes what frustrates me is the conversation sort of has this underlying presumption that there's readily accessible, affordable treatment for everyone, and that is simply not true.
That's a fallacy, 100%.
It's a fallacy, and it's underneath some of the objection to harm reduction. So first of all, not everyone's ready for treatment today, but also even if they are, they may not be able to get it. But harm reduction to me will keep them alive until, for many people, it will be until they're ready for treatment. But even if they're never ready for treatment, they're human beings who deserve to have the best life that we can give them. And that can mean improving their health and reducing their risk of overdose through harm reduction techniques. So I think it's a false dichotomy. I think most of us support both. And I view abstinence as, for many people, I think in the long run, that is a good path because, for example, for me, I don't believe I could use in moderation. And now that I've got sobriety underneath my belt, why would I go back to that chaos? But
Right.
some people aren't able to get there or choose not to. And that's, an individual decision. They don't need to be punished by death or getting HIV or whatever it might be because they choose to continue to use substances in whatever way they see fit for themselves.
Yeah, I just don't get it when people just, and again, I don't want to sound like one person on the other side, but when people say, well, when you're giving away clean needles, you're condoning drug use. No, I'm condoning life.
Yeah.
I'm condoning the ability for somebody, hopefully down the road, to make a decision that'll be more healthy. But until that time, I want to keep them alive. I don't want them to die of HIV. I
Right.
don't want them have to work a truck stop, because they don't have Cadillac insurance. Oh, we can help you, but you need to have Cadillac insurance. I mean, I find that ghoulish. I really
No,
do.
it's true. It's true. I mean, even when I got sober, I had to wait. I was on a wait list because I didn't have insurance and I didn't have money. And I was on a wait list for 10 weeks to go into my treatment program. I had to call every Monday between 9 and noon for my name to keep moving up the wait list. And if I missed one Monday, I was going to drop to the bottom. And I lived in a stable household and it was still a challenge to do that, right? Imagine people who don't live in a stable situation. It's nearly impossible. And so we set up these barriers. And the other thing that really concerns me is when we set up abstinence requirements for treatment. For example, a lot of treatment programs still today, if somebody has a relapse or slip, they kick them out. Like, that's not a health policy based decision. You would not kick someone out of treatment for any other medical condition because they weren't 100% compliant or 100% successful. So there's a lot of problems with being so focused on abstinence that we aren't always doing what's best. But again, I support abstinence-based programs. I think for many people in the long run, that's going to be the healthier option. And we need to have more treatment available so people who want to make that choice have the opportunity to go into a program that will help them do so and build the skills they need to do so.
Absolutely. And some of these places, and no names or who's saying which one, but when they show you these stats that say, all of our people, they don't have anything, they don't ever F up, they don't ever, that's because you throw them out and you're just manipulating the statistics. You put them on the street, you're not helping them.
Yeah.
You take the cream of the crop. That's like saying, I'm a teacher. That's like saying all of my students are A students. Well, yeah, if you throw out everybody else and only keep the A students, you're not helping anybody. You're just selecting people. I mean, that's not helpful.
Right. And even with that, most people don't, even the people who complete their treatment program, whether it's 30 days or whatever, most of, a very high percentage don't have perfect abstinence from that point. That's just part of the reality of a substance use disorder. I used 3 times in my first 5 months, and now I'm going to have 30 years tomorrow. And so it's rare we set up sometimes these false requirements that you have to be perfect. Which is really demoralizing to a lot of people. When you tell people every time you have a slip, you're back to day one. I think that can really be debilitating, and it's not true. I don't think you're ever back to day one because you have learned something during the time, even if it was a month. Well, you were in rehab and they taught you things, or you weren't in rehab but you had the experience of trying to manage your cravings and thinking about what's working and what's not and all of that. And so there are a lot of the paradigms that aren't really that helpful. And the other one is, I think that we expect people to go into treatment 100% committed to abstinence on day one. And the truth is, even most of us who end up choosing abstinence aren't there on day one, right? I mean, usually it's a process. For me, I went into treatment. I didn't even think abstinence was an option on the table. Like, I didn't believe it was possible for me. Right. And it wasn't that I wanted to keep using it, was that I didn't think I could stop completely. And so I was trying to figure out how to do better, how to use less. Like, that was my goal. Right. But with exposure and with learning and with getting some, days and weeks under my belt, then I started to see and seeing examples, seeing that other people like me had done it. then my mind started shifting to, well, maybe this is really an option for me. Maybe I can have this if I work hard. And so I think we need to be more willing to let people express their ambivalence than we sometimes do. A lot of programs will shut that conversation down. You're not allowed to have it. You're not allowed to talk about it. When I think it's normal and it's healthier and will help the process if people are allowed to be open about where they are at this point in time, and where they, hope to go. But false pretenses don't help anybody.
Oh, I totally agree. And, I'm all fired up also because I just finished the book, Empire of Pain, about the Sackler brothers and that whole legacy. And again, this is Darren Redmond talking, not Mary Beth O'Connor. Boy, I'll tell you, amazing what we as a society condoned. We made a whole generation of addicts, didn't we?
We certainly allowed the pharmaceutical companies to present lies, and we accepted them. And then what did we do when people started having problems? We cut people off. I mean, the problem
worst
now
thing
is
in the
that
world you could do.
Right. The problem now is we have overreacted, and some people do have chronic pain, and some people were managing well at a reasonable dose of medication, and they're all being cut off because the DEA sets the limits on how much the pharmaceutical companies can reduce, and they're going after doctors or pharmacists that they think they're anywhere out of line, which makes, if the line is here for the DEA, the doctor's got to sort of back up to here to make sure they don't get close to the line, right?
Exactly.
And that's having an impact on patients who have legitimate need for the medication. So we didn't do either side of it well. We didn't do it well.
No, again, you speak the truth. I mean, it's so true because there was just an overreaction the other way, and the people with real pain, now they still have the pain, and now you're actually pushing them to the street.
Right.
But you say, hey, look at the statistics, right? It's just making them real malleable. Look, we cleaned things up. No, you didn't. You drove them to the street. And that's not what you wanted to do. But when you have pain, that's what happens. And at the same time, boy, FDA just these lies. I mean, and this is again me talking. Read the book Empire. It's all I have to say. Read Empire of Pain, and you'd be amazed that the same people that were running Purdue Pharma was doing the marketing for Pfizer. That's all you need to know. So.
Well, the other side of that I will say is that I think we've lost the perspective that most people who use drugs, even opiates, don't develop a substance use disorder, right? I mean, even with heroin, it's under 20%. And so a part of what we're also missing is that the people who developed dependency, often there's something else going on. There's usually, there's emotional pain. A lot of this happened in communities where there was a sudden economic sort of collapse, right? So there's no jobs, there's no opportunity. People are struggling in pain at the loss of their role, their fear about their future. I mean, there's a lot of emotional things going on in some of the communities that were hardest hit with substance use disorder. That's not just about the readily accessible drugs. It's about untreated stress, untreated mental health. And so what should have happened when we saw what people were turning to is that they need to have access to proper mental health treatment. And again, many people don't have access to that either. And if you are going to cut them off of drugs, you're right that you have to taper them down, or you have to give them a replacement, give them, buprenorphine or methadone or something, because that's the gold standard of treatment. And they weren't offered mental health, they weren't offered taper, and they weren't offered medication assisted treatment. And so they were just basically tossed. You're on your own. Good luck. And it doesn't work. It didn't work out. And it's so disrespectful to the people as individuals and who they are and what their life circumstances. The goal should be to help them, even if a mistake was made. Well, how do we treat them with respect and give them the care they need to find the path forward? And we didn't do that.
Oh, absolutely not. And we will be, unfortunately, living in that malaise of caring for quite a long period of time, because it's not going to end anytime soon. And again, people like pointing fingers at political parties and at different things. And I just feel so bad when I see these people, on the streets, and nobody wants to be that person. Very few people, let's put it that way, want to be that person. And people have to be responsible for themselves. Yeah, but you know what? When you lived in circumstances that created that environment, it happens. Now what? Now what? We're here. We could wax poetic about why it shouldn't have happened, but how do we help the person? Do we just disregard them? No. But I'm telling you again, books like yours, your speaking engagements, you tell people, hey, here's what you can do. And it's not easy. And I want to harken back to something you said earlier, and shame on me for not bringing this up, because it's one other thing I loved about your book. You didn't go to some fancy West Coast, high paid place, No, that, by the way, probably has about a 7% success rate, maybe. You put in the work, you rolled up the sleeves, you made those phone calls to get into a place that would take you. And so it's doable, people. You don't need that other place. It's nice you can get that kind of thing, but you don't need that to be successful.
But I will say that California at the time, and even today, I was able to get disability for being in treatment for substance use disorder. And that was part of how I was able to afford it. And most states don't offer that.
And let me tell you something about California. I'm sorry to cut you off there, people. Listen, they hunt, they do real well in helping people in that respect. Say what you want about gas prices, some other things, but what Mary Beth is talking about, 1000%, that's great. I was able to get a lot of Narcan, the Narcan program and things like that. And we were able to give out thousands of boxes of that when I lived there. You're right. I'm sorry to cut you off. Go ahead.
I mean, California's got a lot of positives, but we also do have a significant deficit in treatment options for people without money. And so I say that, I had paid in, it's sort of like part of unemployment insurance, right? It's disability. But if you hadn't, that wouldn't be necessarily accessible. But I mean, California does have a lack of treatment beds as well. We may have better intentions and we're better in a lot of ways and we've improved, but still, even in San Francisco, there was a proposition that passed for treatment on demand. And that was like 5 years ago and we still don't have it, so we still need to do work, but in some ways we are advanced. I mean, like California had the rule about Narcan having to be in the schools, and now a lot of other jurisdictions are starting to do that. So we do tend to be progressive, but we still have work to do here too.
No, I live in Massachusetts now, and I love where I live. But that was one of the first questions I asked, and it's not in the schools.
Yeah. And that's ridiculous. I mean, when I talk to friends and family, especially if they have teens or 20s, I mean, one of the things I tell them, if you have a teenager or a 20-something in particular, those age groups, I would have Narcan in the house, because and part of the way I help them accept it is to say, look. Well, two things. One is that it used to be that most people who died of an overdose, they were long-term, people with long-term substance use disorder. So in other words, it's going on for quite a while. And you have an opportunity, if you're the parent, to maybe see the signs and know there's a problem. But today, with fentanyl, a much higher percentage of the people who die are casual users, third-time users. And so the parents don't have as much of an opportunity to even notice that something's going on. And so I explain that to them, and that usually makes them sort of pay attention. And I also say, and it doesn't have to be your child. It could be one of their friends that comes over and has an overdose in your house, right? And so that, I think, helps make them more comfortable to view it as just part of something they should have, just like they have a first aid kit.
Oh, I totally agree. So where do we go from here as a society? I mean, just kind of start to wrap things up a little bit. Do you see us progressing in the right way, which means a little more open to helping people and understanding that there's trauma and the mental part, you cannot separate the two? What do you think? What do you see for the future?
Well, that relates to the pin in the criminal versus public health approach, right? So we were, and in some ways we have gotten better about viewing substance use disorder as a disease. Although I will say, even people who say that, a lot of them still want to penalize people, or they judge, it's really a mixed bag about that. But one of the big problems with substance use disorder is criminalizing, drug possession, right? I mean, we have about 500,000 people in the US in jail or prison today just for possession, not for any other related crimes, just pure possession. And to me, there's a couple of problems with that. And one is that if you say substance use disorder is a disease and then you criminalize it, well, that's a contradiction, right? If it's okay.
100%.
On top of which, it's much more expensive to incarcerate people than to treat them.
Yep.
And so even if you only want your tax dollars used the best, you could treat 3 or 4 people for the same amount of money as you incarcerate one. The other factor is that there's a strong racial disparity in the way we enforce our drug laws. And so even though whites and people of color use drugs at very similar rates, the rate of arrest and incarceration is significantly, often 3 to 7 times higher for people of color for the same behavior. And so that undermines the validity, the credibility of the system. But I will also say what's happened now is we were sort of moving in the right direction, and in some ways still are, but fentanyl has scared people so much that in some places they're using it as an excuse to re-up the criminal consequences. And for example, there's laws that they're making it homicide laws if you sell or give the drug and the person dies. And they talk about it, they sell it as, and we're going to get these big drug dealers, with this law. But what really happens is that most of the time it's their friend or their brother, right? Because people who use drugs share drugs. I may buy the drugs and, for 3 people, and then they give me the money and I give them a third. I mean, that's the way drug use operates in America. And so they're selling it as, and we're going to get the big cheeses, the people that are really up there selling to a large group. They're at the top or higher up the supply chain. But in reality, what happens is, your best friend is now going to go to jail for 20 years to life because she shared drugs with you and you died.
And especially if she's Black.
Yes. And the other problem with that is too that people get afraid to even call for help, to call 911 if they're worried that they're going to get arrested. I mean, there are good Samaritan laws, but they're not all clear or 100%. And some of them, if you gave the drug, the Good Samaritan law doesn't protect you. And so there's a lot of recriminalizing related to the fear around the fentanyl problem.
And again, neither one of us is saying that fentanyl is not a dangerous, horrible thing. That's not what we're saying. But what we're saying is, don't try to manipulate one thing and then just try to build back in some laws that were bad laws to begin with.
It didn't work the first 50 years we tried them, so why are you doubling down on them now? They didn't work. They have never worked.
And I could speak to this coming from a family of law enforcement. I can speak to this from having a political science undergraduate degree, from a master's degree in education. And that is, everything that the judge said is true. And then here's another layer of paint, especially if you're not born with blue eyes and blonde hair, is that when you get out of jail, good luck getting a job. Because you had a possession, let's say you had it, okay, whatever, and you're a knucklehead 19-year-old, you're an overstressed, back pain 35-year-old, and you make a decision and it's a bad decision, and now you go away for 5 years and you come back and rebuild your life. Well, go ahead and get a job. Go ahead and get a job when they ask you on that application if you got a criminal record. And what are you building? You're building a caste system of people that can't find a darn job, and they can't get medical insurance, and you wonder where they're going to stop getting their pain from. They can't get employment. And am I wrong?
No, I mean, especially when it's pure possession. I mean, if somebody assaults someone under the influence, I mean, that's a different scenario, right? You have to deal with the behavior. I mean, I understand that, but when it's pure possession, when most of the people, I mean, I think it's like 75% of people in jail and prison have a substance use disorder. It's very high. I mean, it's ridiculously high. And it's just not like you said, there's a lot of consequences. There's housing consequences, employment consequences. You can't get a lot of benefits if you have a felony on your record. And so there's ripples all the way through, and it's a very expensive and inefficient way to deal with substance use disorder. So
By the way, they, she, or he, who you want to see in elected office, you can't vote for them either because you now no longer have the right to vote.
That's true. In a lot of places, you no longer have the right to vote. That's true.
You know, so you talk about creating a caste system of untouchables alive and well in America. You know, and so not being lighthearted before we go, you know, I've said this to David Crow about his book, The Pale White Lie. And I'm saying this about your book. Screenplay, movie.
So I don't think we've mentioned the title, which is From Junkie to Judge, One
Yes.
Woman's Triumph Over Trauma and Addiction, available on Amazon.
Sorry,
Visual
because I'm an
sites,
idiot.
But I'm actually, there is somebody looking at it who's a producer for a cable channel, and so,
Oh, beautiful.
but there's a long way between here, you
Oh,
know,
no
and there,
doubt.
right?
But it's a story that needs to be on the screen, I think.
It would be exciting. I mean, it would be very exciting. But in the meantime, you know, I haven't had a chance to write very many opinion pieces. I have had a few out, as you know. If anyone's interested, on my website, junkietoJudge.com. But I'm going to start writing again and continuing to speak and, you know, do what I can in the meantime. But yes, it would be a very exciting day if that were ever to happen.
Well, let's hope it does, because it can help a lot of people. And I know I'd be the first in line to buy a ticket to see it. And see, you're talking cable, I'm talking big screen, maybe both. But thank you so much, Judge. I really appreciate your time today. And yes, From Junkie to Judge, this book needs to be bought. I'm going to put a link to it when I put out the podcast. And thank you for being my friend. And again, like I said off air, when you're at Cape Cod, dinner on me.
I will let you know.
Thank you so much. You be well.
Thank you.
Bye now.